you mentioned malls. That's kind of interesting. And what struck me about this project, because it started when it did, it's almost like it's inherited an urban planning philosophy that was popular maybe back in the 70s and in the 60s. That these days there's a lot of people coming out and saying, well, this isn't the right way to do this. I mean, I'm thinking of the idea of malls is one, the other is these garden cities and a lot of that kind of 60s stuff.
Right.
And so, I mean, is there an aspect coming into this where a lot of the layout of how this was going to work was in place? So do you have to do you have to fight against it? Do you think that still works as an idea in terms of how it can interact?
I think it still works, and here's why. Because one, we don't see this as the end-all and be-all of the arts in Dallas. It's one component. And I say that because it's critical that if you look at what we are doing as an organization, that we have not limited our connections just to this destination. We're not looking at it as this is, now we've solved the art problem for Dallas. We recognize exactly that. And so, for example, when we work with Titus on their shows, some of those shows are going to take place, other venues like SMU campus, and we're still part of that because we realize that if we can take this asset and leverage it to benefit the larger arts community. So we're also providing ticketing services for organizations that don't perform in our buildings because we can still bring the benefits of the center, the lower overhead, the efficiency, the broader reach on the ticketing, the higher profile for the website, so it benefits groups that never even perform here. And that's okay because, again, we recognize that, and it goes back to your urban planning thing, that not everyone is going to come down here for events. These aren't necessarily the right buildings for all events. Even if they were, we don't have enough square footage and enough open nights to accommodate everybody. And more importantly, from an urban planning perspective, whether you look at it as cultural planning or just urban planning, you need to have the arts distributed. So it's like the library. You have the central library, but you also have regional libraries, and they both fill sort of different functions. On the one hand, I can get popular novels in both, but regional libraries do something different that the central library can never do. And while we don't have that hierarchical arrangement with the rest of the arts, we are part of that system, and we understand that what we can do is help a lot of other arts groups without it being necessarily hierarchical. So, for example, we're working with Curtis King, and we're doing jazz roots. Now we understand that Curtis has jazz in his facility. Curtis has a great education program. So why don't we connect what we're doing with jazz with his program with jazz? It's not hierarchical, it's not an umbrella group, but it's just simply recognizing that his organization is part of the same system as our organization, so why don't we build those connections and make them work? It's almost like more of an internet model, like hyperlinks. I mean, think of it, the old model in the arts was, okay, if we're going to work, for example, with Curtis, well, we need to be a formal partnership program, and we need to have all kinds of contracts, and is his education program now going to be a subsidiary of our education efforts with jazz, and how does this all work? That's not the way the world works now. There's multiple points of entry, and so it's more like a hyperlink it's kind of like, okay, you're reading our Jazz Roots program, and you click here, and it jumps you over to Curtis's program. Now, if you're the consumer, it all looks like one big seamless effort, and yet we both have our own identity. So that's the long way of saying why this model still works, because we're not taking it quite so literally, I think, as they originally intended in the late 60s and 70s. The form is still there, but how it functions is updated for the 21st century. And that's why I think of this as what's going to make this a great performing arts center is that we are looking at it from that Performing Arts Center version 3.0 as opposed to the old model, which is all about the buildings and the geography. We're now looking at it more as about the system that we're helping to create.